So Senate Government Operations, it is Wednesday, April 14th. In normal times, we would all be sweating April 15th coming up tomorrow because of our taxes, but I guess we don't have to do that this year. So we are going to spend some time with Steve Klein going through the pots of money that we may have access to, what applies to the areas that we cover, general questions. I'm going to have Steve start. I am going to, for 1 second, well, as long as it takes me to run downstairs and back upstairs, grab my folder because I was on meetings down there this morning. But Steve, I'm going to have you sent us that nice list about how you're going to approach this. So I'd like to just have you get started.
Sure. Thank you very much, Steve Klein, Drug Fiscal. And what I thought I'd do, and some of you have already heard a good part of this presentation in other committees, so I don't know really the speed you want me to do or how much you want to do it, but I was thinking of doing 3 things today. One is go over the ARPA bill, the resources, and some of the issues that are going to be affecting your committee or issues that you might choose to get involved in. Then I thought I would take a side trip to the Senate budget process that's going on right now, because there are definitely some government ops issues in that. One is the Pay Act issue. The other is the pension related working group question. There may be housing and homeless and court needs things, which I'll just mention briefly, but the first 2 are pretty big. And then talk a little bit of some of the end of the session things that could affect your area of jurisdiction. So that was the presentation for today. And seeing that Emmeren's joined us, I mean, she'll be doing, I guess the Pay Act is more in your court. So I'm not going to go into a lot of it. It's just that when the House passed the Pay Act, they passed it as part of the budget. So it's in the budget. And so it went through the GovOps and then came to the appropriations. They put it in and sent it to appropriations. So I didn't want it to continue on its journey without at least having you have a chance to think about it. So that would, if that's okay, that's what I would do. And
Chair White, doesn't the Pay Act come to us for discussion?
Well, it does, but and normally what happens is the Pay Act is a separate bill. And in this case, the Pay Act morphed into part of the budget. And when it came over from the House, it came over as a subsection of the budget. So it should be reviewed by you all, but it's not a separate bill anymore.
So last year we had testimony on the Pay Act, and it was a separate bill. And we supported, our recommendation actually was to fully fund the full 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the 1 year got funded. So it shouldn't take us very long to just review it.
I think that's correct. It's really pretty much the second year, but there are some little bells and whistles that Emeren can go into and lay out that are in there. And just one thing that is not in the Pay Act, but it's sort of the invisible part of the Pay Act. You all probably remember is last year there was an issue about having legislators receive the same pay as other constitutional officers, and that's in place. So it's not discussed in the Pay Act. So what will happen is when the pay raise goes into effect in July, instead of getting what would amount to a 2.25% raise, legislators would get a 4.15% raise.
Whoa, I wonder if we can handle that.
I know it may be too much for you, which take it out. That's all you have to do. But I
think we'll all have to get financial consultants.
Yeah. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, that we can amortize that. For the last several years, we've been legislators and actually see if we could make a livable wage.
Yeah. So maybe I'll return to the ARPA piece.
Okay.
And, I sent a document out. I don't know what the protocol is here. Do you just look at it on your screens? Do I share it? Does Gail share it? What's the recommended process?
Did Gail post it?
It came by email, Allison.
Oh, it did?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. When did that come? I didn't see it. I'm sorry, Steve. I haven't looked at email. I haven't had much time.
This afternoon at 12:40.
Thank you. Oh, I see it.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
So, again, as so you've seen this, I'll try not to, I'll go through it, and you have to stop me if I'm getting incoherent, if it's too much or whatever.
Okay.
It's a lot of money. We've had, since you were here, we're in April. A year ago, March, we got our first federal relief bill. Then we got one in December, and we just got a new one in March of this year. And it's this new one is probably, before that we were talking in the neighborhood of $8 to $9 billion of impact on Vermont. This is probably another 3. So we're sort of approaching $12 billion total impact. It's a lot. It's going to be a lot of money. And we're going to talk specifically about what comes to the states. About $1 billion goes to Vermonters directly. The increase in the EITC, UI not being taxable. There's childcare increases, and it's pretty interesting stuff because it's monthly payments as opposed to end of the year tax credits. Money to the businesses and individual checks that went out, unemployment supplements. So a lot of money went out directly, and that will be helping us in the economy as well as the individual Vermonters. And one of the things to think about, and just to sort of the big picture piece, is we have 2 phenomena going on. One is that we have a lot of money for a short time, 2 or 3 years, 3.5 years, depending on the source, which is coming into the state to spend. The other thing we have is a lot of money coming into the economy for a relatively short time that's having a huge impact on education fund revenues and general fund revenues. And they're really growing. So we'll probably this year have a revenue increase of maybe $70 million. But the problem is about the same time, maybe 2 or 3 years from now, when the federal dollars start moving back to a more normal period, assuming they ever do. And they probably won't for a while because we're expecting another bill, infrastructure bill later this year. At some point, the general fund and education fund will similarly go down. So what you'll have is it's one of these things where you don't want to get people too used to this level of spending, because you will have a really hard time adjusting, we all will, to the lower revenues and the lower resources if we spend them on anything other than one-time money. So that's sort of like our admonition. Not that it will be a perfect thing. I think there's a lot of pressure, and we're seeing it to spend this on things that are not going to go away. So and it's a problem because it's not just 1 year money. This is unlike the money we got last year in CRF that was basically, they gave it to us in March and told us to have it out the door by December, even though they did extend it for 1 year. This is money they gave it to us in March and said, you can have this till the end of, I think it's 2023, and probably even into 24. So it's going to be
I thought
a
we
longer
had,
time.
I thought we had till the end of 24 to spend it.
Yeah, you do. And each one has a different spending timeline. The education funds was in 23, but they've given another year. The other, the big ARPA money is 24. You're right. So and each one, there's some money, the rental assistance money has got to be spent much quicker. So it's a variety of limits. So anyway, just going through the money that comes through the state. One of the things that is the first big change is we got $568 million for local government schools. Schools have been getting money, but the total amount going out to schools now is $380 million. And what schools voted on, they knew about the first chunk of money that was coming in. But since then, there's about another $270 million that was not part of their budget production in March. So schools are going to have a lot of available cash. And one of the things that happened was we had all predicted that the school budgets would grow about 2.7%. They ended up growing in the low ones because they're probably making use of the federal dollars. And so schools are an area where you have one of the vulnerabilities is that with all this money, the schools have to use it in a way that provides services for now and for the next few years. If they build it into permanent hires or contracts or things like that, then that creates that problem when your federal money goes away and the ed fund doesn't have the sales tax. So it's a risk. On the municipality level, and you probably have heard about this issue, that there was money given to both towns and to counties. Now, states like California, counties are a big deal, and they manage programs. Actually, Cameron probably knows more about this area than I do, but it's in Vermont, it's not so big a deal. So what's going to happen in Vermont is the county money is going to go to municipalities. And so we're going to see, when you have money going directly to a municipality, and just these numbers I put on the sheet there, 19 million goes to Burlington, 160,000 to Calais, just some hypothetical numbers here. The Royalton gets 280. In addition to that, they're going to get the county allotment, and that'll be distributed. So those
Steve,
numbers may be 2.5 times what you see on that paper.
can I ask you a question about that? Did we actually try to pursue changing that so that the money would actually go to the counties? Because we do have counties and they run the county courthouses. And
So that's an issue. Yeah, the county courthouses are really funded by through the state funds some of them, and they some is through, they're not separate entities that can get money. There's been a number of issues saying, why can't we give that money to CUDs? Or why can't we give that number to regional planning, or to water districts, or sewer districts, or the courthouses? And I think that everything we're hearing out of Washington is that the default is they're going to go to municipalities, towns. The municipalities can allocate that money differently. They can choose to fund a CUD or a police district or a fire district, but that's not the way the money is going to come in. So,
but
yeah.
Steve, I mean, I know we don't have guidance on this yet. We were told this morning in Senate Economic Development by Karen Horn that we're going to get the money in about 2 weeks, and that we'll have 30 days. Then we have 30, then the state has 30 days. But I mean, we don't yet have guidance on this.
Yeah.
And we do have we have county budgets. We have sheriffs and courthouses and a couple other things.
Yeah.
The assistant judges are county employees. We have county employees. I mean,
we pay them out of the state. The state pays sheriffs. We pay the judges, and so it's paid by and I can be really wrong on this, but some are paid through most of the money comes in through state structures. I mean, the counties don't levy their own taxes, is my impression.
we do have county taxes.
do.
Aren't they levied through the local?
No,
No.
the side judges create a budget for the county, which includes like maintaining the sheriff's offices, the county court system,
Probate.
anything that the offices for the probate judges, all of those kinds of things. The side judges set a budget, and then they assess the towns by population.
Right, and the towns put it up through their budget. Yeah,
but it is a county budget.
So
right. I'll take another look at it, but everything I've seen is that they're not going to get it directly. But I'll definitely look at it. You're raising.
Okay.
It needs to be looked at because, for example, when we renovate courthouses, those are bonds, and those are raised in the county and assessed per person in the county. They're bonded by the county. So it's not like somebody else is bonding that. It is the county that's bonding it.
Yeah. Let me check on it. I mean, it's a good question, and that's not what I've talked to Walter's office. My understanding is that it's not expected to go to counties, but I will check and see if there's any discretion or room on that. And you're right, we haven't seen any guidance. So everything we have is based on conversations with congressional folk, and the guidance could become very different. So,
and I think it's important at least to push that, because we do have. Anyway, it does exist, and there is a county budget, and there are county expenses.
Yeah, and then but then again, you get to this issue where if the 79 million roughly that goes to, actually, including Burlington, about 76 million goes to municipalities, and then the 121 to counties.
Yeah,
that's a little little lopsided, given the size of the counties versus.
It may
towns.
be, but I think counties would be happy if they got half of that. I mean,
I understand. I just don't know that we'll have that discretion, but it's worth my checking out. Yeah.
It is, because
Yeah.
they've already come to us with HVAC needs for courthouses. They've come to us with a bunch of needs that are COVID related.
We might want to, as a committee, contact our congressional delegation and tell them to,
That's a great idea. Yeah, you feel free to
Represent us.
Great
recommend.
idea, and it's something we need to do fast.
Mhm. Okay, cool. So we'll leave that one, and that's an example of something you can deal with. It's really different than CRF in several ways. One is that there's some similarities. We haven't seen regulations. We didn't get the CRF regulations right away, and we actually got them all the way through the fall. And we're hoping to get the first regulations in the next few weeks. We haven't seen them. So you have a funny situation where the legislature spent some of this money in anticipation of receipts, and the administration complained, but now the administration has spent what's left. So it's we're all spending money based on an assumed regulation that we haven't gotten yet. But we don't know. I think this is going to be quicker, but it's not in yet. CRF, as we talked earlier, was 6 months from March till December, really. Actually, more like 9 months. The state and local funds are through December 2024, 3.5 years. Schools are September 2023. And the school money, though, there's statutory guidance that they can get it for another year. So it's probably similar in the 24 range. The other thing is, unlike the CRF money, which was all in one big pot, we're getting the 1.052 state relief funds. We're getting 113 billion, which is capital money, and that's going to be in a separate pot. The interesting thing about that is it's not spent yet. It's not received yet, but that really gets to this whole issue about is it really institutions committee work? Will they also, is there some major sort of changes that are going to come about? And we'll see that in the legislative world. When you come back in January, what does it mean? I mean, is it going to be 100% like it was before? There's a lot of thinking that the committee rooms that we have today couldn't support what they did prior to the pandemic because of the close quarters, the need for space, and there'll be not a lot of comfort with bringing that type of environment back completely. So one of the things that's going to have to be dealt with is what is the appropriate environment for the legislature? What's going on in the administration is a discussion about, do we need the same space we needed before? A lot of people are working remotely. This, in some ways, made a huge, it moved us forward on the whole concept of understanding remote work. And does it change space needs throughout government? I mean, those are the type of things that are going to be, I think, does touch on your area of jurisdiction. It's just sort of, how do we lay out space? How does government operate in a post-pandemic world? There's other money that is just coming in with the mortgage assistance relief funds, 40 million there. We haven't seen it yet. We don't have any guidance. We know it's coming. They haven't even told us how to apply for it yet. So this is going to be a continuing picture throughout the next few months. We have a fair amount of childcare money, and we're going to go through a list in a minute of where the money is coming through. But it does have that characteristic of, you will be seeing more money come in, and you will be seeing more clarity about the use of the money for the next 6 months or so. What else can I tell you in general? The big $1 billion, to give you a sense of what we know, there are basically 4 purposes. One is to respond to the public health emergency with respect to coronavirus, COVID-19, or its negative economic impacts. Then it had this language saying, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or other aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. So one of the questions is, how broad can that be interpreted? You've seen the administration talk about housing as responding to the public health emergency with respect to coronavirus, COVID-19, or its negative economic impacts, and including assistance to households. Well, can we fund housing programs? These are the types of areas where you're really stepping into making sort of decisions that are fairly broad, given the lack of guidance. And so there's a lot of unclarity. There'll be a lot of discussion about how much do we do now where we feel there is clarity, and how much do we hold off till January, February, March when we know what the guidance is. Another thing that you can use the money for is respond to workers performing essential work, hazard pay. They sort of set the amount of dollars at $13 an hour, which is not, compared to some states, that would be not a lot in Vermont, but that's another use of the money that's specifically allowed. Then it allows for the provision of government services that would have been covered for revenue where we've lost revenue. And one of the complications there is we don't really know how to determine revenue loss. Like in Vermont, if you look at the Ed Fund, we're probably up in the Ed Fund because we got a lot of money in sales tax from where we were a year ago. If you look at the general fund, we're down a little bit. But if you allow us to look at separate lines of funding, like for example, rooms and meals tax, we're way down. So if we can sort of look at the funding revenue sources where we're down, we can apply maybe 100 million to that ability to use money just to replace revenue and provide general services. If we have to sort of look at fund agglomeration, then it's a different story. And so part of this is just we're waiting to see what the guidance comes out about how much we can apply to that. The good news is if we can apply it to the revenue down, it's very flexible money, anything government pays for. The fourth thing is, yeah, I'll just throw out one more and then ask any questions.
That sounds good.
You can make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. So water, sewer, and broadband are clearly allowed. I stop there if there are questions.
Yeah, Keisha.
Well, I don't even know exactly what I'm asking, but what you just said, Steve, made me wonder, are there ways that we can anticipate positive revenue loops from the money that's coming in? Like a kind of bump in certain types of revenue that will generate their own future revenues. And we just know that, okay, this will like add to places where we don't have to worry as much in the next few years. Does that make sense?
Well, so it's actually a good question because
Thanks, Steve.
one of the things, well, no, and we talk about it a lot because one of the things that's happening is we are living on the revenue forecast that was made in January, and that was before this bill came out. So, and it was actually before we really took into effect the December bill, because that came out December 31st, and the economic models they used didn't really even include that bill. So we said, okay, maybe we should do a new revenue forecast and take into account that how this is going to impact the FY 21, 22, and 23 revenues and give us more, quote, ongoing revenue. We could spend a lot more. And so that was the plan, to really do a new forecast in April. But what happened was the federal government changed the tax filing date. I think the chair alluded to that, to May. And so we wouldn't really have the new revenue forecast until we wouldn't know what the old numbers are, and it would really affect the accuracy of that until late May, probably even June. And so we know that there's going to be, so we, because of our practice in Vermont, we don't spend we only spend revenue we've forecasted, but we know there's an up. So you might see some contingent spending, but this is an issue. Do we, how do we sort of take into account that extra revenue in a way that allows us to spend it? And it'll probably be some form of contingent spending where we'll sort of say, you know, if the revenues come in, this shall be used for X. But it's, again, with the caveat that it's really hard because in the past, you'd have an event that would provide revenues for 1 year. This is going to provide revenues for maybe 2 years. But it's not an ongoing forever type of thing. It's like a several year bump. And so you still have to be careful with building in long-term spending. But, you know, we ask people, do you want to do a revenue forecast anyway in April? And the thinking is just because of the lack of accuracy, because of the tendency to have to be conservative, there wouldn't be a lot of value in it. It would be, we're just going to make estimates, and we think what will happen is, and we will have a pretty big bump up in the July forecast. And what's being discussed in the appropriations bill is the legislature may put a fence around the revenue. So we don't just let the administration decide what happens to that money. It may be put in reserves for certain purposes. It's being discussed. You know, I don't really know what the committees are going to do, but it's a good question. We're going to,
you know, I'm just going to comment that it is a lot of money and it sounds like an awful lot of money. But when you look at the pent up needs, it kind of, the estimate comes down, or what seems like a lot of money comes down. We heard this morning in judiciary that we are in desperate need of opening up the courts. People are not getting their constitutional right to justice. And that is a huge, huge amount of money. And the women's prison, I mean, there are huge needs out there. So I think that while this sounds like a lot of money, I suspect that there are going to be demands way beyond what it is.
But the challenge that we face is just like our school infrastructure, which we've put off. We know we have over $500 million worth of school infrastructure needs.
Yep.
This money isn't necessarily going to be able to be used for that, is part of the problem.
Yeah.
No, but there are things that it can be used for that were exacerbated. So,
but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a really important thing. I mean, we're sitting here in appropriations. They're getting, so we got a request from the private colleges for $90 million to help with COVID. In addition to the money that's going to state colleges, they asked for another, I think it was 25 or $30 million for their COVID related needs. UVM has a request out there. We just got a request for $200 million for environmental groups for helping us with the transition to the to cleaner air. You know, clean water is asked for a fair amount. So in addition to what the governor put on the table, there's the world is sort of you know, the money is out there. You're getting phenomenal amounts of requests, and you know, even the change in the legislative structure could be in the neighborhood of $30 million, depending on what you do with the facility. So it's your point's really a good one. That it feels like a lot today, but the needs are massive, and yeah.
Senator Rahm.
I'm not suggesting that you try to do this, Steve, but I'm wondering if I heard you say that you're trying to capture all the requests we're getting and put them in one place, because that would be heroic.
Yeah, we're not. I don't think we're trying to do that. I didn't mean to say that. We're trying to hear them, but it's. I think I keep getting them from Senator Kitchell. Keeps sending me on. We got another one. We got another one, and I don't know that we're going to kind of capture them. I think they're building a budget in a context. In some ways, it's like, you know, this will keep getting more. I mean, what will happen is, so the sooner we get, I don't want to say that, but getting the budget out sooner has some advantages, because you will have. I think that the concept is maybe we get the budget out with things you have to do now. You leave a lot of money available for next January, February, when you really can assess what the money can be used for, and you really can assess, you know, what are the needs that are out there, and then the legislature can make a determination of where to allocate those resources. Right. So I think that that's going to be the push, is to sort of, you know, do what you do now, but not spend every penny of it.
And before we go to Senator Polina, I just want to say for anybody watching, like I'm not suggesting that anyone email us to get their request in, you know, so that they get to the front of the line. I'm really worried that what's happening is, you know, certain groups are organized to think to do that. Other groups wouldn't think to do that. And we're getting this really uneven request.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know how you're trying to manage that, but folks, we're not honoring people just
no, and there is not a process that is, you know, nobody's collecting these things and then making decisions.
So I'm going to go to Senator Polina, but first, can I just say something? I have to say that looking at it, Steve's suggestion of looking at it, what we need to do now, and then when we come back in January, when we have more time and more guidance around how we can use it, makes sense to me. And I will just say, for anybody who wants to hear this, I have a ton of faith in Senator Kitchell and her leading this. So I just needed to say that, because I think that she's absolutely brilliant. But okay, Senator Polina.
I agree with the comment about her being brilliant. I think that's really true. Now, I was just going to ask or say, this is more money than we got last time, but I thought we were going to have more flexibility in how to spend this pot of money than we did last time. Is that true, or do I have it backwards?
You know,
you
it's an interesting question. There is, well, the answer is I don't know until we see the guidance. Right now, I'm a little, with the only three purposes, there's things that are completely left off. So I would say there are areas where, even what the governor proposed is not, I don't think it's supported by the law alone. So we'll know better in January when we actually know what the guidance is going to be. But there's also a language that says you may not use this money for pensions. It's interesting because one of the characteristics of this bill is they spend $85 billion to support private pensions and to multi-employer plans, other employer plans, and in this case they put, however, states cannot use any of this money to support pensions, and so it's not totally flexible money. But then the other thing that comes up is there is this bill, and you've all heard about the infrastructure bill that's being developed out of Washington. We think it's on an October timeline. And if that bill passes, it may have more money for broadband or more money for clean water. It's actually interesting because they're also defining infrastructure very broadly to include childcare, healthcare. So a lot of it goes again to this notion of maybe we don't spend it all today. Maybe we leave room for this infrastructure bill to be taken into account. And this is the only time in the history of Vermont that I think of that, in my knowledge, that, and I haven't been around forever, so, that this was sort of like this was in the Coonan years, where there was revenues came in very strong, and there was every sort of branch was sort of spending more and more and more money. And it was, then the end result is there was a fairly major pullback, and people had to temporarily raise taxes, and it was not a pretty scene coming out of that. But it is a very unique situation. And I've only, I've been here close to 29 years, and we've never been in a situation where this much money is coming in to the state.
Right.
And just to say one concept, we in Vermont are the #2 in the country in dollars received per capita. I think it's Wyoming is #1, and then comes Vermont, because we have
probably Montana. North Dakota.
Yeah, North Dakota is up there, but they're not quite where we are. But yeah, so we're, not every state's in our situation. So if we talk to other states and say, what are you spending the money on, like a New York or a Massachusetts, they have a lot less available cash to cover their needs. And this actually has come out to be a big issue in the rental assistance program, where Vermont has a total of $352 million, which we may not be able to spend all of it. But a lot of states have, and that's because of a small state minimum. A lot of states are getting the amount of money they're getting is a fraction of that, and their needs are way higher. So there's been pushback in our housing community about saying, is this correct? Is this right to do? To take money from urban areas that have tremendous needs and have it go to Vermont. And so there is some language that says, if you don't spend it by a point in time, I think originally it was September, but 65% has to be spent by September, then the money gets turned back to other states. And there are issues involved here that are really value questions that are, but we currently do benefit by having a lot more resources. Okay, so on the next, just going down the sheet, what we do have is a list of the sort of breadth of the type of issues that are being funded. And, we talked about the big one, the state and local treasury, Department of Education, again, the $380 million going to schools is a lot. One of the things that's happening is at the same time in December, when the bill was passed in December for relief, it was part of the FY21 budget, the federal budget that was supposed to have been passed by October. And there's a lot more money for schools in that budget. And one of the concerns has been schools are so busy with this CRF money and now this money that they really haven't been picking up the money available in the base 21 budget. And that can affect future allocations. So one of the challenges on the school front, and AOE is going to have to deal with this, is making sure that they use the money that comes through normal streams as well as this money. And schools have varying capacities to handle this. Some schools have fairly sophisticated financial operations, other school districts don't. And it's going to be, that's one of the issues that, just is management. And the same thing's happening in the municipalities, and as the legislature and the Senate really started this thing of setting up technical assistance through VLCT and through regional planning entities to work with towns about usage of money, which was passed and is now part of 315. Administration for Children and Families, there's money there. There's child development block grant money, 18 million, stabilization, childcare stabilization, 29 million, entitlement, 8 million. And we understand a lot more is coming in the next bill. So when you one hand is you have this childcare bill going through, on the other hand, you have a fair amount of federal resources that are coming in at the same time. And again,
So
we haven't seen
Steve,
guidance.
what around the childcare money, is that meant for one-time expenses, or is it aimed at increasing subsidies to parents and families? And what is it? Is it increase? Does it end up increasing the base a lot?
No, I think you're right. Most of this is pandemic related, so it's limited time money,
Okay.
and it's less for base increasing. But again, the same question comes up as you use it. How is that going to influence the system? How is it going to how is it going to mesh together with the ongoing need? And there is clearly an ongoing need. You're right. Just other things on this list. There's 3 million for congregate meals, and the good news is there's a fair amount of money coming in. The bad news in mental health got about 8 million. Now, these are small chunks compared to what the needs are, but it's something that needs to be taken into account, thought about, and used. And so there's money in a lot of different areas. There's a ton of other money that came in where that's not through the state. For example, there's rural broadband reconnect money. We haven't even figured out where that comes in or how much it'll be. And it was 100 million, and just how it's going to get distributed, we don't know. There's contingency reserves on food money, and there's WIC program modernization. So a lot of this will come through. Some of it will come to Vermont, and that'll happen all through the next few months. And I think what I sent you was really the list of where we are today and what we know about, and all the areas where we don't know about.
See,
Go ahead, Allison.
Right. I'm just trying to keep up with you in this. And so what you just said for mental health, for example, doesn't coincide. I thought you said we had 8 million for mental health, and our needs, of course, are much, much higher than that.
Yeah.
And here it says the mental health block grant is only 27 million.
And right below it is mental health, substance abuse. I'm combining those two, 5,479.
Oh, okay.
And so I just said between the substance abuse and the mental health, it's about $8 million. And there's a lot of overlap between those two programs.
Right. And education, I think we've been talking about 380 million.
Yeah.
And here I only, it just doesn't add up to 380 million.
Right, because this is only the most recent bill. And so the education has gotten money in 3 tranches. They got money last March, they got money in December, and then they got money here. So here it should be in the neighborhood of 250 million or 260 million.
It's not even 100.
No, let me look. This is
it's 65 billion and 6 million. And
these are, I think those are, hold on, let me find it where it is.
Anyway, I'm just trying to understand what you're talking
165 million from the Education Stabilization Fund. The problem is that's when you're talking federal dollars. It's not the breakout of the state. Let me look at the state dollars here. The way the sheet works is the first one is Vermont numbers. And you see education, if you go to the education numbers, you see the the Department of Education doesn't include it's in a separate category. So I just gave you that on the first page. It's about 280 million is the total for the 3 years. 121 in December, 100 I think it's 180 this year, and then there was more money for it. I can give you the details of that.
Got it.
So go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to understand. So this isn't all the money necessarily. This is
and a lot of the money isn't allocated on that sheet. I could send you a sheet that shows the education itemized, because that is a whole different.
I'm just trying to understand what you sent us. That's all.
Yeah, and again, Education, we do have the totals. Let me send you a copy. I'll send, it's on our website, and I'll send it to Gail for distribution. It gives you a detail on the education money, just so you can get a sense of where it is.
Can I ask you a question about
Yeah.
the, just for example, when you said 8 million for mental health and substance abuse, what do they mean by that? I mean, we have very serious
Yeah.
needs around these, but many of them are base funding
Yeah.
needs. Are they talking about the ability to do something like build some step down beds? What are they talking about here for mental health?
Yeah, this is not that type of money. And this is, I think your point was raised earlier that you mentioned, this is really one-time pandemic related needs of, it's short-term spending. And I would be really remiss if I were the one helping you figure that out. I would actually recommend bringing in somebody from the mental health world to talk about how they're using it.
Okay, because it seems to me that one of the issues that really is pandemic related was the huge increase in overdose deaths and in addiction issues. And yet we don't have the facilities to be able to provide those services. So it does seem to me that using some of this money for facility development.
Well, that would be an example of the 113 million they gave you in capital funding.
Yeah.
That would be a type of example. You could decide that money should be used for the facilities. And to me, I think that's the example where it really does intercept. It does affect, it's your committee's area. How do we have 113 million of capital dollars for that's not being allocated this year. The institutions committee may next year, but what do we want to do to our physical structure? What are the key priorities? And it's a government operations question as much as a capital question. And I think you're raising really good issues. There was some talk about, could we use it to build one major facility for corrections and rather than all the diverse smaller facilities. And there are a number of ideas out there that haven't really been fleshed out.
Well, that we'd have to have a big conversation about before we even agreed that that's what should happen,
Right.
whether we could use the money for it or not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so I did
Okay.
send you the education detail, and I can go over that if you want. But that's it's 3 different bills, and
Well, but the stuff that relates to us in GovOps is, I think, what we're
yeah, I think it's a
handling.
difference. So we'll sort of move on from that. Okay, and then
Okay.
yeah, so let me. And there's detail of every area of government. A lot of this, as I said, is not coming yet. So let me just move on to the other issues, if I could. Yeah, so the issues that really affect you is, I think one is the process of fund allocation. And I think we talked about that. There is sort of this argument that maybe we don't do it all now. We do it in the January, February, March period in your next session to give you a chance to really think about prioritization and need and the timing thing. The other thing that's happening, just to give you a sense, this morning at Joint Fiscal, there was a proposal by the administration to create 48 more limited service positions over in health department because they're trying to process the vaccines. And we're talking a fairly large number of people that have gone through to work through there. I think it's in the neighborhood of 300 or 350. And just there's a lot of, and those positions are being created for 2 or 3 years because they're limited service, but we're trying to build a structure that can keep people vaccinated and provide these types of services for the short term. And it's all being funded by federal grants. So in a sense, another area to just think about generally is the whole position issue context about short-term positions, long-term positions. We're in a period of time where we are providing short-term positions. And that's an area you people have focused on a lot. So the other thing that's coming up now is authority over funds. And this is a big political issue. It'll probably affect a lot of committees in the legislative or executive branch relations. There was an issue with education that in the prior 2 bills, the money was given to the governor and the secretary of education. And, you know, Constitution sort of says the legislature appropriates funds. And over time, I think it seemed to have resolved that the executive branch is going to go with the legislature appropriating funds. But what happened, the legislature added in 315 specific language saying that the legislature shall appropriate the money that came in through that education grant. And so, you know, some of this does raise issues, and this is nationally happening between legislative and executive branches. What are the powers in the case of emergency for executive branch to function? And what are the sort of role of the legislature? And it's sort of, we've sort of just gone through an event which puts a lot of pressure on functionality and emergency and centralization of power. But there is this larger thing. What have we learned? What are the issues, and how do we deal with it? Which is a real sort of GovOps type issue.
Yeah.
So that's on the ARPA thing. Then the three things I wanted to mention, or four things on, and you've touched on one. The Pay Act bill we talked about, that's hopefully you'll be able to spend some time going over that. The pension working group issue. As you know, there was a proposal in the House to do pension reform. Didn't happen. There's now going to be a proposal coming out, we think today, from the House GovOps to set up a working group. We're getting close to the end of the session, and you know, I think that there's some talk about moving that into the appropriations bill because the 150 million is still there. So you're going to have to just sort of think about, it's something where you need to communicate with the appropriations committee and just see what you're thinking about this whole thing. How does the process unfold now? Because there may not be time for a bill from this task force to go all the way through between now and, or it may, you know, it's just an area of question basically. Is how would we deal with that? Housing and homeless. I just wanted to flag this.
Steve,
Oh, sorry.
From
Yeah.
what I understand, there's going to be a definite proposal on governance, which is a bill,
Correct.
and a task force. I don't know why that can't be.
So the question is, does that continue like the Pay Act? Does it continue out and pass the House, let's say the end of this week, or maybe next week? And then does it come over and then you do your review, and does it end up going out as a separate bill? Or does it get, like the Pay Act, put in the budget? And that's the question. Come on.
No, I think that we need to take some testimony on this and figure out where we're going. But I do not believe we have time to do a bill.
Right.
We aren't even, I don't know when they plan on voting it out of the House.
I think today.
No, not out of the
Oh, yeah,
House.
committee.
today.
Out of the House, right.
So even.
It has to go through other committees. So it'll go from the.
Right. So we won't even get it until probably whatever that date is that I have here in front of me, we probably won't get it until the 23rd.
Yeah.
And that leaves us 1.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And I have very serious concerns with what they're passing out. So I think that what we need to do is we need to take the testimony on it. We need to have the conversations with or without their bill. And then, as Steve says, maybe put our recommendations into the budget bill.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's something you need to start moving on. Yeah.
Yep. I hear you. It obviously didn't make it in their budget. I mean, so it would be up to us to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing is, what is in the budget from the House is the 150 million being held for some sort of plan, so that it's going to be an open issue depending on how the legislature treats it. So it's just, all I'm doing is flagging issues. You're exactly right. This needs to be, it's in your area. The next one I wanted to flag is probably less in your area, but you should be aware of it. We have this, and you probably are, the big issue of the homeless, where you have about, and I don't know if the count is exactly right anymore, it's somewhere between 2,400 and 2,700 people in hotels. And of that, 400 or 500 kids. Before the pandemic, the number was 400 people. So it's a lot higher. Some of those hotels want to be out of the business of housing homeless.
Steve, we're working on this in Senate Economic Development.
Yep. So Senate Economic Development's working on it. The Human Services Committees are working on it. Appropriations are working on it. But it is, there have been proposals to move it to the local level to handle homeless. So I'm just saying it is a governmental operations issue too, where, just how does this get dealt with? What's the sort of structure that makes sense? So I'm not, that one, I don't know if you need to be in, I just sort of raising it as an issue. That, and you already mentioned the court needs. Post-pandemic, right now, we've had a lot less cases. Is there going to be a big push on the pandemic? The questions of the building, one of the issues is there's been a moratorium on landlord-tenant cases. What's going to happen when that moratorium expires?
We had testimony this morning in judiciary about this, and it is when the moratorium is lifted and when the courts there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases that have been built up and that are going to, it is very, very serious, and we need to look at that because when we got a proposal from Pat Gable also about what they would need in terms of positions.
Yeah.
And something like, I don't remember how many limited service positions they're asking for. I don't have it right here in front of me, but it's a lot of money to open up the courts.
Yeah.
And then that then ricochets. And if you're going to open up the courts and you're going to have them doing it, do you have enough state's attorneys and enough defense attorneys? The Defender General is very, very short-staffed, as are the state's attorneys. So it's a huge issue.
Yeah.
It
And so,
is.
and all these can be handled in other committees, but they do touch on your area of jurisdiction. So I just didn't want to leave them out. The other thing is you're going to see, and I mentioned these before, the legislative return, the institutions committee in the House put basically a ring around thing. It was $50 million of this 113 of capital money for both courts and for the legislature to think about space needs.
The 15 million is for both courts and the
Yeah, and the
legislature.
legislative needs, and it's not assigned. It's just sort of said in next January when we come back, we're sort of reserving this money for those types of needs.
Wait a minute. I need to understand.
Yeah.
15 million is going to address
yeah.
both courts and legislation.
Correct. Legislature and courts, and it's sort of and I don't know, they didn't divide it. It's just, they put basically a holding place on that for those types of things. And it could be, it was in the House version. I think the Senate will probably do it too. It's just saying that let's not let that money all be spent without putting some sort of hold on it for those types of needs.
Where is that, Steve, in this that you
That's
sent?
in the Capitol bill. And I can pull that up and make sure.
Did you say 15 or 50?
I think it's 50, but I know it's not
Okay.
15, but I don't
Okay.
know. I want to be 100% sure that it's
Okay.
on that. It's definitely a fairly sizable chunk of money, but it's.
But if you look at our courts, at our court system and our courthouses, the courts can't even be used because they have such bad HVAC systems. So that 50 million for both the legislature and the courts is piddly.
Yeah, and but as you pointed out, there's so little money. It's so much money, but
I know.
it's so little money. It's a combination of the needs are fairly massive.
Well, Steve, where is that 50 million? Whose bucket is that in?
It's
Is
in
that-
the, I'm actually trying to pull it up as we speak. It's basically reserved for capital bill spending. And it's not in a, it's not spent. It's basically, they sort of put a hold on that money for, of the 113 million.
Okay.
Oh, that's in the governor's proposal?
No, it's in the
In the
House.
House capital bill.
House capital budget.
Oh, it's in the House capital bill. Okay.
And so the bill is currently in the Senate. And I'm just trying to find in the, let me see if I can find the language that does that. They just set aside the money for those types of needs. And let me just,
Yeah. So there's so much at play, all these interplaying budget.
yes.
It's very hard.
It's a very, yeah, I mean, you have, and it's sort of the nature of the legislature, you have a lot of people assigned to different things, and there's a lot of overlap right now. And, that'll be something you'll have time to figure out next year, but I'm trying to see where that language is in the bill. Well, let me go on to and then, so that's the State House, that's the courts, and there was one more, I just want to flag the other thing that is being talked about in the executive branch, and I don't think there's a proposal yet, is what is the space needs for, I don't know if you've driven through Montpelier area. I'm in my office now where I'm probably the only person in my office right now. And, when we come back, it's not a clear thing that Vermont has a rule that, not everybody has to be vaccinated. If people have religious or other reasons they're not going to be, what is the right thing to do when we come back? Is the public going to come in the building? Are you going to be back in the State House that way? But what's going to happen throughout government? How much have we moved to an online world? And not everywhere. Obviously, corrections, you can't do that. But there's a really a valuable question to look at, is just sort of what is the implications of the pandemic for the future of governmental operations in terms of the space needs of government. Do we need the same building structure? And I was talking to one administrative official who says we could probably do with 30% of the space in a lot of cases, because you can have people working remotely and coming in and sharing office space down the road. So it's sort of the whole question about space usage in the future of the administration, government, as well as service provision, is another area which does affect what your area's jurisdiction is. And there's not a clear answer. It's not a single jurisdiction area.
Can I ask a question, Steve? When is what is the projection in terms of getting information to our appropriations committee about our suggestions?
I think that and things could have changed. I know there's a meeting today, but my impression is their goal was to vote on the bill next Tuesday. So they're in a very
our Senate Appropriations Committee wants to vote out the appropriations bill next Tuesday.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a joke, because the policy committees just haven't had the time to dig into the amounts that we're responsible for.
Well, I think it's going to be the timing is relatively. I mean, the House announced that they're going to be ending the session on the 15th of May, yesterday, 14th or 15th. You guys, you're 18 weeks. You funded for 18 weeks, which is till the 15th of May. You can choose to keep the session going, but it's if you want to go to that point, the general structure would be that the appropriations would come out of the House next week, or come out of the Senate sometime next week. So it's not like, and the dilemma with this is just to, and here I am sort of overseeing my role, but you're not going to solve everything now. I mean, I think part of the thing is figuring out what do we need to do now and what do we hold till next year, because there's just too much uncertainty and too much not knowing with the guidelines, the regulations, the resources. So you're going to have to decide, what you must do and what you don't do, and how do you, and it's not going to get simpler because, as you pointed out earlier, the requests tend to grow rapidly as you stay.
Senator Rahm.
I had kind of a new subject to ask Steve about in the committee.
Okay.
I'm just flagging, so in the capital bill, it says the amount of 51 million shall be allocated for infrastructure for legislative and judicial branches. And that's how much they've reserved.
So I think it's related. It's a related question, but I'm wondering if this committee, if JFO, I'm wondering the last time we looked at purchasing contracts, vendors, how we think about who receives these resources and what kinds of businesses that don't otherwise get access to contracts might be put into the pipeline. I mean, I started worrying about that in economic development today. Like, how do we make sure businesses who aren't always at the table are able to bid? I know we have Davis-Bacon and other complicated things, but there's going to be a lot of money and a lot of contracts, big and small. And I just don't know if this committee is the one that looks at purchasing power and vendor, guidelines. And most states have something to say that minority and women-owned businesses should get a fraction of those.
I don't think we have anything that says they should get a fraction. I think that we are the committee that deals with contracts and with procurement. So, and we have pretty rigid guidelines, I think, on how they have to advertise and where they have to advertise, and there's state websites where all the RFPs are posted so that people can go on and look at all the contracts that are available. That's my understanding of it. We've had Debbie Demore is in charge of contracting for BGS, and then there will be, I mean, there's different kinds of contracts, and if we're talking about physical contracts like buildings and stuff like that, then that goes through BGS. If it's a contract for, and I don't even know what kind of a contract you would do for the childcare, in the childcare field, for example, that would go through DCF. Or through their, it's a special department within DCF. But I think that there is a state website that lists all the RFPs and all the contracts that are available.
Well, number one, if someone could point me to that and I could assess if I think it's intelligible and sort of how we might talk to somebody about if it's really feels accessible to people. And I don't know if the rest of the committee is concerned. I certainly am, just as a senator. I don't know about about this committee, but this is a lot of money to get out the door. And I just want to make sure there are new people who might benefit from this than have traditionally accessed state contracts.
Well, I do know that when we did the small business things, that the Women's Commission was very active in advertising and contacting people and getting people involved. And I would say that some of it is going to depend on advocates to make sure that the word gets out, because at this point.
Well, I think what Keisha is referring to is that with all ARPA money, for example, all federal money, are we requiring that that it all be it's the Davis Bacon.
Mm-hmm.
Are we requiring that they all have what's the term we use?
Well, the Davis Bacon requirements are that isn't if it's federal money, we probably have to follow Davis Bacon rules.
Well, but
there might be other things we have to do federally to make
Right.
sure it's accessible to minority and women-owned businesses, that I just would love to know, first of all, if we're even doing that, because we do have a history of not being great at following federal guidelines around access.
Yeah, right. So I think that there are requirements about the prevailing wage.
Yeah.
And Davis Bacon, if it's ARPA, but I don't know if we have to articulate that specifically for this new ARPA money. And we, of course, have made a lot of effort in CRF money to make sure that a diverse community of businesses benefited.
Mhm.
And we probably want to make sure that the same is true with this tranche of money.
Well,
we have had some limited conversations in GovOps over the years about trying to direct contracts towards local people, and I think we talked about good wages, and I think we talked about women at one point as well. I don't think we talked about marginalized communities. I'm not sure, but and we had people from BGS come in and talk to us about it, and I don't know if anybody else did. It obviously didn't really go anywhere. There were all kinds of issues raised about the impracticality of what we were talking about doing. But I think you make a good point, Keisha, and I think given the money that's going to be coming in, it would be appropriate for our committee, assuming we had some time, to have this conversation and say that when the federal money comes in, we'd like to see it directed in certain ways. Because it does come under GovOps for sure, and we've had some conversations about it, but we haven't gotten anywhere very well. So it's something we should look at.
Some of our conversations were about giving preference to in-state And you can't
Right.
do that because of
Right.
interstate commerce. So you can't do that. So requiring performance measures for all contracts, which I think that most of our contracts now do require performance measures, and a couple other things like that. But yeah, we have had.
Okay, but it sounds like the performance measures didn't include demographic information, so you
Well,
don't.
that isn't a performance measure for the contract itself.
Right, but reporting didn't include demographic information. You don't currently know how many businesses are minority or women owned that have gotten state contracts. Would that be?
No.
I don't think we've ever asked that question. I don't think it's there.
I would love to ask that question of somebody as a start. Are we tracking any of that now? We should be at least tracking it with all this ARPA money. It should at least be something that we know when it all got out the door, who it went to. That would be the bare minimum. And I would really love to start having a conversation that the rest of the country is having about how to actually ensure that people who are usually at the back of the line have a shot at accessing these contracts.
Yeah, well, we could have somebody from BGS, but it'll be. So Steve, what do you think that most of the contracts are going to be physical kinds of contracts? I mean, what?
You're raising really complicated issues because a ton of this money is not coming through the state. I mean, that's going to be going through municipalities, going through local governments, going through schools. I mean, literally, it's just a lot. So your ability to control it is going to be limited. I think one of the things you're raising, which is really interesting, would be, do you, and this is the type of thing where if Senator Probst is coming out, you have to move pretty quickly, but do you require that there be some sort of recording or reporting on this? And you're going to have to fund it, staff it, and whatever, but it's not off the deep end. It's a lot of money going out. You may want to, look at how this is going out so that next January, when you come back, you can start thinking about what's worked and what hasn't worked. So the creating a capacity to monitor how this goes might be a good first step, and then to sort of next year figure out what you do about it, because we're just in a really tight, you're in a tight timeline right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that one of the things I just want to flag is we still are in a pandemic. It's not a steady state, and so the uncertainty and the needs are it's just a different world right now. But I think the questions you're asking are good questions.
Right, and I hear the urgent timeline, but that's exactly what we know throughout the whole pandemic has left women and people of color behind consistently. Oh, it's first come, first serve. It has to happen right now.
Right.
Oh, look, women and people of color didn't get anything.
Which is your point about, and I think that the point about finding the information and putting that priority on information gathering now, so that it just starts happening, is really really good point. And there might be something you could do in the Senate budget right this week. I mean, just bring it up and add it.
Right. But I just like to go backtrack a little bit. That's not fair. I mean, we made very clear in CRF money that economic development grants had to go to all those communities, Keisha. We haven't neglected all those communities. I mean, there have been disparities, yes, in the pandemic, but in terms of our appropriating money, we've worked hard to make sure that we included as many communities as possible.
Well, I mean, my statement was really universal about the pandemic. If you look at any reporting around the country, there's been article after article about how women and people of color.
Great, but
I'm not saying about economic development.
Well, no, but in Vermont, we've really made that effort to try and do the best we could do at the time, given the time frame we had, and we can always do better. And here's an opportunity for us to perhaps do it a little bit better.
I just want us to be very careful about how we gather information. We've talked about that a lot in here, about what information do we gather, and do we have policies around how we gather that and what it's going to be used for? And because I think that we and I don't know, this is a longer term issue, so I'm not sure how to do it, but I think we need to be pretty clear about what information we're gathering and why we're gathering it. So if we just put a question on there about on on an RFP that people answered their race or ethnicity or their gender, does that really get at what we want? Does it do anything? Does it actually help the application or hinder the application? I mean, does it make people feel uncomfortable to put that on their application because they think it might be used in a negative way? So I think that we need to be very careful about what it is we ask for and what our policy is about how we use that.
I'd suggest we get Deb in to talk about what she does currently. And so we aren't spending time doing something she may already do.
Right. I just do want to say, I mean, these are questions that other states have wrestled with for a long time and figured out how to get past some of those hurdles, or at least address them and evolve the answers to those questions. So I don't disagree with you. I don't want to do it for no reason or in a way that's harmful. But, you know, as Jennifer pointed out about, Lauren Hibbert pointed out about other states, she's part of consortiums where they do this in other states all the time, and they figured out a way to do it in a way that doesn't feel penalizing.
So
Yeah,
it's
no,
okay,
no,
I think I'll
I-
step away. I'll try to,
Sorry,
I'll follow up on
Steve.
your court thing. I mean, this is sort of beyond my world of expertise. So I think I've covered everything I was going to cover, so.
So it looks to me like we have to rearrange our whole schedule for the rest of the
Right.
week and next week.
That'll be okay. Yeah.
That's what it looks like to me. Okay,
Okay.
thank you so much, Steve. That was helpful. Although maybe it wasn't. It got me more confused than I was before.
It sounds like there's no money for pensions unless we appropriate it in our own way. It sounds like the Pay Act, I mean, that's a big piece of this. The municipalities and counties, I think we could go to bat for the counties. You know, as I'm listening to all this. And I think we could definitely go to bat for procurement and ensuring broad inclusion in procurement. And I think that would be a great thing to have Deb come and talk to us maybe if we can, if there's a spot this week.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're gonna have to redo all the whole rest of the week's schedule. If we have to weigh in on the Pay Act and the retirement issue and procurement and the process of fund allocation before Tuesday.
Right, and we need clarification. And I'm sorry chairs got canceled because this would have been helpful to discuss in chairs on the timing of all this.
Yeah, I had no idea that they wanted to pass it out on Tuesday.
We knew it I mean, it's why we've adjusted our schedule in Senate Economic Development, because we knew we had to get our budget numbers in, and it's really going to be tight because it's just with only 3 hours a day, we just don't have the time to hear the whole, it's very frustrating.
So what are, in terms of turning in numbers now, we have a few minutes here before, we've changed the schedule so many times that I think we don't have anything until 3:30.
Ooh, could we take a little bit of a
Could we
break?
take a little break right now and come back
Come back at 3?
at 3 and then have half an hour to talk about where we might go with all of these new things? Does that work?
Great. It would
Okay,
be
great.